Hello and welcome to today's video. Here we will be looking at some of the top project management terms that you will want to be aware of and familiar with. Now, these have routinely cropped up in my project management career over the last 10 years, and they are also the terms that I wish I knew from the outset back when I was getting started. So whether you are just getting into project management, perhaps you've applied for a position, or perhaps you're going through or signed up to a training course, maybe you're even doing some research or have heard of some project management terms and are not aware of what they are. Well, hopefully, if you keep watching today, then you are going to be much better educated on some of these key terms. Now, these terms are going to make your life as a project manager much easier, especially if you are able to fully understand them, because many different stakeholders and teams will, or other project managers in your organization will routinely use them. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, one quick note before I run into this, you can see the first one here, we've got a number as well, but these 18 terms are in no particular order. And I do recommend that you perhaps research each one of them a little further to ensure you completely understand how they're commonly used. So the intention here today really is to introduce you to the terms and give you a starting and reference point. So number one, we have scope. So often referred to as project scope. Now, this is the part of project planning that helps specify and document all of the project goals, the deliverables, tasks, costs, and deadlines. So imagine scope as what you aim to achieve. And it's often documented and referred to as a scope statement. So that's the actual documentation that will be created by a project manager that outlines all of these key things. You'll also have things like boundaries, who are responsible for each of the different tasks, and how each of the different pieces of work will be completed and approved. At number two, we have the WBS, otherwise known as the work breakdown structure, although some people merely refer to it as the WBS. Now, what this essentially is a hierarchical diagram of all the work that needs to be completed on a project. So it's almost taking a step back or seeing the overall picture, if you like. It defines the scope of a project, as we've just discussed in the previous term, and it breaks down all the work into smaller components. Next up, we have risk management. So this is a process of identifying and assessing risks to decrease their potential impact on a project should they arise. Now remember, a risk is anything that can impact your project. So they could have a positive impact as well as negative ones. So just bear that in mind. Number four, we have stakeholders. Now, this is a collective term that is used for anyone interested in a project. So you can have internal stakeholders, you can have external stakeholders, and what will often happen is stakeholders are kind of classified or grouped together into, specified groups. So you might have a leadership team, that's a particular group of stakeholders, or you may just have, client or customer. So that's just kind of a way to basically outline the type of communication perhaps you might want to send to each stakeholder and the documentation you provide for them. Next up, number five, milestones. Now, these are essentially specified points or events in a project, and they can show important progress, key wins, and you can also use them as reference points. Now, they help with project scheduling and monitoring, and they essentially give you the ability to track progress. And when a milestone is reached, often that's a cause for celebration and something worth communicating, either to internal or external stakeholders. Now, next up, we have baseline. So these are essentially used to measure the performance of a project against different parameters. So they're often set at the start of a project and they are routinely measured against. So the main three types of baselines that are set up on projects include schedule, so are tasks completed on time, You could have an expected completion date. That would be your baseline. And then when it actually completes, then you can compare the completion date to the baseline date. And that would give you, whether the project has run on time or behind, etc. There's a cost baseline. You can see if your project has run, has kept costs minimal, or if the project has been profitable. And we also have scope as well. So has the project encountered something which is known as scope creep, where the project has ended up doing more than the original kind of goals. Number 7 is deliverables. Now you might hear this crop up surrounding products and services, and that's because deliverables are essentially those. It's what the project creates and what is provided to either a customer or a stakeholder as part of that project. So they can be both tangible and intangible. And that might sound difficult to kind of understand, but if we look at the examples below, it could be something like project documentation, on a PC that's sent via email, such as a report, or it could be a software product that's installed on a computer. So they're obviously examples of intangibles. Same for server upgrade. That example as well is intangible. For something more tangible, it could be a physical product. So it depends on the type of project and the organization as well. Next up, we have dependencies. Now, this is basically where tasks or actions are dependent on others to either start or complete. So dependencies really dictate the order in which events, tasks, or work must be completed in a project. So the 4 main types to be aware of are start to start, and that's where a predecessor task must start before the successor can start. There's a finish to start, where the predecessor task must finish before the successor can start. Start to finish, predecessor must start before successor can finish. And finish to finish, where the predecessor must finish before the successor can finish. Now, one way to kind of imagine this is if you're going through kind of a software deployment. So imagine that certain things need to be done before you can move on to the next step. So just imagine it in that kind of framework. So it's essentially ensuring that everything can go to schedule by making sure that certain tasks are completed. You can't have a server upgrade if the computer is not up to spec, for instance. Next up, we have Gantt Chart. Now, this is an artifact that's created by a project manager, typically at the start of a project. And you'll often see Gantt charts in project management. They're widely used. And what they are visual displays of the whole project. So it shows a schedule of the activities and all the tasks on a project. And each activity is represented by a bar. So we can see on the right hand side, you can see that bar there. The dashed line going through is kind of where we're at today. So imagine in this example, we're in kind of week 7, week 8 of the project. Now you can see the length of each activity via the length of the bar, and that dictates the duration of each task. And activities follow in the order in which they occur on the project. So taking our example on the right, you'll see on a Gantt chart, on the left you have all the events or activities, and at the top you'll have a timeline. Maybe sometimes it's down the bottom as well. But here you can see that activity B cannot start until activity A is completed. And you can see the various different aspects of the Gantt chart here. So yeah, just a visual representation of what the tasks look like and the activities. Next up, we have the status report. So this is documentation that is created by the project manager, which illustrates the current status of the project. So it gives an overview of where we're at. So this is where things like baselines and milestones are typically reported on. So it's an important communication tool that is often given on a recurring and scheduled basis. So for instance, a project manager will provide a status report to their customer or client every week, say every Friday, letting them know what's been kind of completed or produced that week. And you have various different status reports depending on the different stakeholders. So internal teams may want to know something else on a project to your client, for instance. Next up, number 11, we have the resource allocation. Now, this is the process of scheduling and assigning resources on a project. So who is going to do what and when? Now, specifying who will do what on a project ensures maximum efficiency and productive use of resources. And it also ensures that skills are used in the best way possible. So for instance, you wouldn't want someone with experience in product working, in some kind of project management capacity, for instance. Next up, number 12, we have the PMO, which also stands for Project Management Office. Now, imagine them as almost, a department or a group or a team. That's essentially what they are. But they are, a specified unit within an organization that basically defines and maintains standards for project management. So imagine them as kind of like a council, if you like. And what they... Not all organizations have them, and sometimes you'll even have PMOs within departments within organizations. Some larger organizations have several PMOs, but what they aim to do is standardize and introduce best practices and ensure that projects complete successfully. So if a particular project had a set of processes that worked very well, the PMO would like to learn about those and then get them kind of rolled out on other projects in the future. That's just one example of what the PMO does. They're kind of like a governing body. And that leads us on to 13, which is project governance. So this is a framework in which decisions are made on projects, and it's all about ensuring that a project is run successfully. So what activities are going to be completed and who is responsible for them. So governing the project, it's looking after them, it's monitoring them, it's keeping them in check. And it ensures that projects run smoothly and, on budget and to time. That satisfaction is achieved by the end of it. At number 14, we have the RACI chart. So it's sometimes referred to as the RACI matrix, or sometimes even the linear responsibility chart. Now, this documents the roles and responsibilities on a project. So you can see an example of a RACI chart on the right there, and it does look quite confusing. So you can see all the different letters starting of RACI, and each letter of the word RACI stands for, so R is responsible, A is accountable, C is consulted, and I is informed. So if we look at that RACI, that we can see that the project executive is consulted on task 1. So task 1 could be client introductory meeting, for instance. So the project executive needs to be aware that that's taking place. That's just one example. So different stakeholders or team members will have different responsibilities on a project, and this is essentially a map which kind of outlines who is doing what or who needs to be informed of different aspects of the project. Number 15 is Kanban. So the way to kind of imagine this is it's a type of project management methodology. So projects can be run in various different ways, and there's various different project methodologies. And the next couple of terms, a little spoiler, will be on the different methodologies and the terms to be aware of. But Kanban is one of them. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a quick example of how it kind of looks. So it's a kind of like a virtual pinboard of delivering a project. So you kind of map the different tasks onto kind of cards, and it kind of shows the project progress over time. So in your to-do list, you would have all the tasks that are kind of upcoming. In progress would be all the tasks that's taking place now, and then you'd almost have like a complete column or card that kind of shows everything that's been done. So you could have all tasks that have been completed, for instance. Number 16, we have Waterfall. Again, a type of project management methodology. And this is really the traditional method of project management. So if you can imagine a waterfall, the water kind of flows downwards, it flows in a sequence. So that's essentially what this methodology is all about. It's running a project through a predetermined sequence. So task B follows task A, task C follows task B, and it's essentially that the project will be planned and conceptualized well before it's executed, and it will be executed in a certain way and sequence. The key word with Waterfall is sequence, just remember that. Now 17, the penultimate term we're going to be looking at today, is Agile. Now, just like someone who's Agile, the way to imagine the Agile project management methodology is managing a project where there's a lot of change. So it's all about having an iterative approach and kind of not planning too far ahead and being willing to adapt if and when you need to. So as the life cycle of a project goes on, different iterations or incremental steps need to be kind of put in place to ensure the completion of a project. So there's a strong focus on change management and adapting to change as and when it happens. So some projects, things happen very quickly and you need to be able to respond. So an agile project management methodology is the way forward for these kind of projects. Obviously it's not suitable for every type of project, but for some it can be very, very useful. And feedback is also considered to be very important to these kind of projects or the methodology. So it just ensures that things happen at the right time and change is kind of successful when it does take place. And lastly, number 18. So this is what I have a qualification in. I'm Prince 2 certified, but it's basically a project management methodology. And Prince 2 stands for Projects in Controlled Environments. And it's a very, very popular project management methodology, particularly in the UK and throughout Europe. But it's basically a defined set of principles and processes that can be applied to any project, regardless of the type, size, and industry. So, it follows a very select set of ways of working. So you have, for instance, your initiation stage, your planning stage, your execution, and your kind of closing. They're always applied to each project, and it's important that those processes are followed for the project to be considered a Prince 2 project. And as I said, kind of mentioned there some examples, but Prince 2 projects use the same terminology, and that ensures consistency and best practice. So these were my top 18 terms. I hope this has been useful. If it was for you, please hit the like button, and do subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be releasing a lot more videos like this, and if you hit the bell notification, you will be notified of when I do release them. And with that, I wish you an excellent day. Any comments, drop them down below and I can get back to you on any of these. I can give you some useful resources against each one if you wanted some further information on a particular term. And if you have any other terms that you think will be useful for the community, also drop them down below. But as I say, have an excellent day and take care.